Hello everyone, this is Panzer J coming to you from upstate New York. Will be the second video on Historical Board Gaming's Global War 39 playthrough. I believe we're up to turn 10 maybe, completed possibly turn 10. We're quite a ways into the game. I kind of lost track. The first playthrough video covered the first 3, maybe 4 turns, and that took around 5 hours, maybe 4. And like I said, we're up to around completion of around turn 10, so about an additional 6 turns, and that took about another 6 hours. So we're all together about 11 hours into the game. A couple of people that played on day 1 were not able to make it back for our second playthrough here. So we're down to just 2. Myself as the Axis. I control all 3 Axis powers, Germany, Italy, and Japan. And then one other person, and he's at this point controlling all the Allied powers. So we're down to kind of a one-on-one battle. As far as how things are shaping up, Germany is in really good shape at this point. Their income stands at 99. So a lot of buying power each turn, and that doesn't include any bonuses they're getting either. As far as how Europe looks, Germany is still in possession of all of Europe. The last turn, or maybe it was a couple turns ago, the British did land in Bordeaux, but I was able to eject them right away on Germany's next turn. So Germany still holds all of Europe, and they've got quite a bit in Europe itself, Western Europe, to kind of guard against any possible Allied re-entry. I've got 3 stacks of armor, which total roughly around 28 or 30 tanks. I got a stack in Reims, in Marseille, and in Western Germany. So definitely located in a good position to be able to counterattack anything that the Allies might come at Europe with. I also have a bunch of planes in Paris itself, both fighters and tactical bombers. So Europe is pretty secure. The British and the Americans do have a couple fleets coming over, which we'll get into in a few minutes. But overall, I'm feeling pretty secure in Europe. I'm not that worried. I also got some Allied units for the Germans coming up. A couple of stacks of infantry in both Hungary and Bulgaria. Some more planes in Eastern Europe. So altogether, I think I got more than enough to repel any Allied invasion. We got some infantry up here in Finland, kind of guarding Northern Europe there. So altogether in a strong defensive position, and with the money that I've got, I can definitely reinforce Europe if I have to. As a matter of fact, plan on using a couple of these major factories to produce some units on this next German turn to bulk up the defenses there. Got a stack of subs, 6 subs outside of Stettin. That actually is the only German naval units that are left on the board besides this lone transport, which I'm sure will be taken out on the next British turn. So definitely not much of a German naval presence, at least in the Northern Atlantic. I do have a few ships, German ships, in the South Atlantic, a couple of cruisers and a destroyer. Thinking about using them to maybe do a little bit of convoying. You got a British box here worth a couple bucks, and then a United States box here worth $5. So maybe do some convoying there and give the American and British players something to think about down in the South Atlantic. But other than that, no other German naval units on the board. Not as big of a deal right now because of the fact that Germany's doing so well, not only in Europe itself, but in Russia, which we're going to get into in a minute here. The British do have a sizable navy, some transports, 4 transports altogether, but you're talking a total of 8 units that can land. And like I said, with what I've got able to counterattack, and before the British can even do that, I'm going to, again, build up some more German units in Europe itself. So I'm not really too worried about an Allied invasion. And if they did happen to get a foothold, I think I'd be able to eject them right away on Germany's next turn. As far as Russia goes, they're pretty much out of the game. They're down to not much. The Germans invaded from our last video till this one. They obviously invaded Russia, and you see a lot of German symbols, a lot of German tokens on the board. They've gotten all of Russia just past Moscow. So not only are they collecting all that income, but like I said, they've got the Russians down to just this one complex that's left in the Far East, which does have a stack of men and tanks, but that's it. Russia's down to less than $20 of income, so not much spending power. Do have a couple of stacks in Russia itself. In Moscow, we got some tanks, a couple of mechs. And then down in Stalingrad, we've got a nice stack of mechs and a nice stack of tanks. So I'm going to be pushing them east. So hopefully, not this next turn, but the turn after that, maybe we'll be in a position to attack this last Russian industrial complex. Also, on this next turn, probably going to produce maybe 3 bombers, put them here in Moscow in this minor industrial complex to be able to use them as additional offensive power to go after that last Russian complex. So we got Russia almost completely out of the game. They do have some stuff going on in the Far East, which I'll get into. But other than that, Germany is collecting by far the most income. I think in second place is the U.S. with less than 80. So they're plus 20, not counting bonuses on anybody in the game. And like I said, their position in Europe is probably too strong for the Allies to either get a foothold or at least to hold on to that foothold. They might be able to land, but like I said, I'm pretty sure I'll eject them right away. So Germany in great shape, and maybe within a couple of turns here, finish off the Russians, and then probably turn their attention to building up a navy, building up an air force to start striking at Britain. Italy also is in great shape as far as both Africa, the Mediterranean, all the above. They've got the British down to just a couple of territories in the south of Africa, and really no units are left at all. South Africa probably will fall on this next turn. They'll also be able to take these last couple of British territories, get the income from that. Other than that, the British have been completely ejected from Africa. So Italy owns most of it, with a couple of German territories spread out through Central Africa. The Italians have also come over here into the Mideast, taking a couple territories and getting the income from that. They have a fleet down here that can start making its way over the Pacific. They're also convoying the Far East Command down here. And there's really, other than these couple of Far East Command naval units, there's not much in that area of the Indian Ocean going into the Pacific for this Italian fleet to worry about. We also have over here at the mouth of the Med, we've got a sizable Italian fleet. You got 3 transports, a handful of destroyers, a battleship, a fully loaded carrier. And what I'm planning on doing with that is we could look at taking Gibraltar here, which currently is undefended. I'll still have to go through the fortress that's there, but that's it. We also got some naval units, or excuse me, some air units down here in this African territory. And as well as, besides taking Gibraltar, we can use this Italian fleet to move out into the Atlantic. And as you can see, in this section of the Atlantic, there's just a couple of British ships, a battleship and a destroyer, and that's it. So this will definitely, this Italian fleet coming out, along with these German ships doing some convoy action, should definitely draw the Allied players' attention down into that portion of the Atlantic. So maybe we can draw this U.S. and this British fleet away, or if not, now I could be in a position to start coming over here, maybe landing in South America, maybe even landing in the Caribbean, with the ultimate goal of landing here in the southern United States. So with this Italian fleet coming out, I should definitely force the United States player to start having to spend money on building up defenses in America. As you can see, there's no units at all in this section of the United States. So definitely going to be applying some pressure with this Italian fleet. We also have some action going on in South America. The British landed and were able to take a bunch of and activate a bunch of these territories, but they also moved into a neutral territory, a couple of them, and that activated Argentina for the Axis. So we got a little bit of a battle going on down there, but the British just have a few infantry units, so hopefully I'll be able to, with both the German units and some Italian units coming over, maybe be able to take South America and get that out of the way for the Axis. That's all the good for the Axis powers. The last Axis country, Japan, not having as easy of a time as their German and Italian brothers here, brothers in arms. We've got a decent sizable fleet building up in Japan itself. We got a stack of 10 destroyers, 3 cruisers, a fully loaded carrier. But other than that, there's not much else going on for Japan. You've got a fully loaded carrier and 2 battleships down in the South Pacific, and that's it. Japan's naval presence has been severely degraded over these last couple of turns by the Allied player. Also, if you look at the Chinese mainland, Japan has really got their hands full there. They haven't taken out either the communist or the nationalist Chinese, and the Russians actually a couple of turns ago attacked Japan and has started moving down into through Korea, Manchuria, and some of the Japanese territories there. The Japanese did kind of counterattack and used some transports and landed in some of these Russian territories and started taking some money away there. But even though the Russians and the communist Chinese don't have a lot, they've got some infantry, so the Japanese gotta, spend some of their resources to clean that out and deal with that. And then in the southern Asian mainland, Japan has built a major factory in Siam. They did take Singapore on the last turn, so that was a nice bonus for the Japanese. And they've built up a decent infantry presence here, so it's kind of a stalemate, although the Far East Command does have a stack of tanks and some planes that can start counterattacking. But the nationalist Chinese got a couple of stacks here, territories worth of infantry, and a couple of artillery units. So Japan, again, is going to have to spend resources on the southern Asian mainland here. As far as the money islands go, they're pretty much about 50-50 right now. Japan did win a couple of naval battles over the last few turns, so they've cleared out most of the Australian and Far East Command naval units, so they've started landing some of their ground units back onto the money islands to take those. But altogether, it's still about a 50-50 proposition down there. As far as the United States, they're building up a couple of nice fleets, one off the west coast of California there, and the other one in Hawaii. And they are convoying down here. I should be able to knock out those ships on Japan's next turn and get the money back from that convoy. Like I said, these turns haven't gone the best for Japan. Their navy was almost completely wiped out. I was down to just like a couple of battleships and a cruiser. I had to spend a bunch of money and build these 10 destroyers a turn ago, just because I saw the United States starting to build up their naval units and figured they were coming for Japan next. So of the 3 Axis powers, Japan definitely is in the weakest position and got their hands full the most. But a couple battles last turn did go Japan's way, and they've really, even though they don't have a lot down in the South Pacific themselves, they also have degraded both the Australians and the Far East Command to the point where there's not much threatening them either. And then you've got this Italian fleet that'll probably start making its way over to back up the Japanese and maybe do some damage to the Far East Command down in the Indian Ocean, as well as maybe start convoying some additional Far East Command boxes. So Japan, not in bad shape. It's kind of like a stalemate. I mean, whereas Germany and Italy have really gained the upper hand um, on the European side of the board, the Pacific is kind of a stalemate. Japan's income only stands at 52, which isn't bad, about double where they started the game with, but they haven't got the upper hand really either in China or in the Pacific itself. But hopefully, with Germany and Italy starting to apply some more pressure to the United States in the Atlantic, the U.S. will start having to spend more of their money on that side of the board, and that'll maybe open up things for the Japanese here in the Pacific. So that's where we stand for the Axis powers. As far as the Allies go, like I said, he had a rough go with the Russians. They're almost completely eliminated from the game. The European part of Russia is completely under German control. And he also had a rough go in Africa, as the British have been almost completely ejected from there. But the British themselves and the Home Isles have held on. Germany did land in Scotland, but then got ejected on the very next turn. And the British have basically completely eliminated the German naval presence in the Atlantic, with the exception of these subs outside of Stettin. And they've built up a decent air force, and they've rebuilt up their navy. So the only problem with the British is Germany's not in a position really to go after the Home Isles, but Britain does, even with the U.S. backing, really doesn't have enough strength to. They can make an initial landing in Europe. They just don't have the strength to really stay. So it's almost like throwing away your units to even land there. So maybe he's got a surprise for me. Maybe he'll land somewhere else I'm not expecting. But at this point, I don't think the British and the Americans really have the strength to stay in Europe, especially with what I've got as far as German defenses. And then, like I said, on this next turn for Germany, I'm going to build up a bunch of stuff, put it in both Western Europe, Germany and in Berlin. So the British kind of are holding their own, with the exception of losing Africa. They did pick up some extra dollars down in South America. So their income stands at 42. It was at one point up to almost 60. It's only been in the last couple of turns that the tide in Africa went Italy's way, and that's really started to take away some of the British income. As far as the U.S. goes, they haven't done a lot on the European side of the board. They do have this fleet coming. It's got a handful of transports, some tanks, some infantry and artillery, some subs, a fully loaded carrier battleship. So more than a match for anything the Germans' naval units can throw at them. But again, the U.S. is probably going to start have to worrying about defending the United States itself once that Italian fleet starts coming out into the Atlantic. So I'm expecting the United States to start pumping money into the United States itself, and that will just give Germany that much more of a secure position, with the U.S. kind of going on the defensive in the on the European side of the board. As far as the Pacific goes for the Allied player, again, they did some really good things. The Far East Command actually was in a very strong position for a while. They're down to about $25, $26, but they were up to in the 30s. They were really not only holding their own in terms of their own territories, but they really started making their presence felt in the South Pacific, gobbling up the Money Islands and, really eliminating the Japanese naval presence. It's been only the last turn or two that I've been able to kind of reverse that tide, take out the most of the naval units for the Far East Command, and kind of start having to force them to put their money into India itself and start building units to defend against this Japanese incursion. The Australians have kind of been just kind of where they started the game. They really haven't lost much in the way of territory or gained it. They've been around 10, maybe 12, 15 at the most as far as income goes. And they had a little bit of a navy going on. But again, this last turn, I was able to take out most of the Australian naval units. So Australia is kind of just hanging on, really not adding much to it. In China, both the Communist and the National Chinese have really given the Japanese a lot of headaches. The Nationalist Chinese own pretty much almost all their original territories. Japan did have them down to a couple of territories, but with the Russians coming down, the Communist Chinese going on a little bit of offensive, and the Nationalist Chinese, they all together have really pushed Japan back. And the Chinese stand at about $10 right now, which again is about what they start the game with. But just the fact that the Japanese haven't been able to eliminate them or even close to eliminating them definitely has to be considered a win for the National Chinese. And then again, the Russians came down. They've taken, as of this point, they've taken almost all the original Japanese territories on the Chinese mainland here. And the Communist Chinese actually got a little bit going on too. So definitely a win for the Allied player as far as mainland China goes. As far as the United States and the Pacific, again, they've kind of rebounded. They were down to just a little bit. The Japanese actually landed in Alaska and came down into Canada, but the U.S. has since ejected them from there. The Japanese also had Hawaii. The Japanese also had Hawaii for a while, but the U.S. has been able to go on the offensive and take out that Japanese fleet, and the U.S. is down to a couple of fleets worth of units that they started to move over towards homeland Japan. So we'll see what the U.S. player does from there. But again, I'm expecting to put pressure on the United States through Germany so that hopefully the United States isn't able to spend a great deal of money in the Pacific anymore, and that might enable the Japanese to bounce back. So that's where we stand through 10 turns. The last video in this series will cover the conclusion of the game.